Hi and welcome. This is Dr. Lisa English Dowdell, and today we're going to be looking at two essential elements of web design: usability and accessibility. Now, these principles are the foundation for creating web experiences that are inclusive, effective, and user friendly. Now, by the end of this lecture, you'll be able to define usability and accessibility in the context of web design, evaluate websites using the WCAG or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and then propose usability and accessibility improvements for a website. So let's get started. So let's begin with usability. Usability is the measure of how easy and efficient a website is to use. Now, according to usability expert Jacob Nielsen, usability has five key components. One is learnability. Can the user, accomplish tasks quickly on their first visit? The next one is efficiency. So, how fast can experienced users actually complete the task that they've come to the website to do? Then there's memorability. So if the user returns, do they need to relearn, how to use the site? Then there's error prevention and recovery. So how many errors do users make, and how easy is it going to actually be for them to recover from it? And then, of course, there's satisfaction. So, is the experience that they're having with your website or whatever your mobile app, is it a pleasant one? You know, think about like a shopping website. So if the user struggles, say, to find the checkout button, that's going to be a usability issue. You know, if they can easily locate and complete the checkout process in seconds, of course, that's going to make for good usability. Again, going back to as far as learnability and memorability, that's the reason why a lot of websites kind of take on the same look. They have similar components because that's what's familiar with your users. That's what they're used to seeing. A lot of mistakes that users make or new developers make, I should say, or designers is that they feel that they need to do something unique. But sometimes uniqueness isn't always a good thing because now someone's got to learn how to navigate through your website if you do something that's different. If we see that shopping cart at the top of, the web page, most of us know what that means, because that's the standard on all the sites. So you want to ensure all of these different components. You want to make sure that your site, is something that someone can navigate when they come to your site. It's easy for them to navigate. It's easy for them to figure out how do they purchase something or how do they, go to the next page or how do they, add something to their shopping cart. You want to make sure that, if they return, that they're going to remember how to use your site. They're not going to have to, take that learning curve all over again. And all of this is going to add to satisfaction and, of course, is going to improve that user experience. Now, one of the things one of the websites that this lecture talks about is the Healthcare.gov site, because in earlier versions of the Healthcare.gov, users struggled with working with that site. Um, they waited long times, for pages to load. They got various different error messages. There was a confusing application process. So all of these things added to sort of like the failure of the initial launch of as far as healthcare.gov. Now, in the course room and also in the description of this video, I'm going to provide a link to a YouTube video that really kind of goes into this into more detail as far as what actually happened, what were some of the mistakes that they made. So make sure that you take a look at that. Okay, so now let's talk about accessibility. And accessibility is ensuring that everyone, including people with disabilities, can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with a website. Now, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or the WCAG, it provides four key principles for accessibility. It states that websites must be one, perceivable. And this means that the content should be presented in ways that the user can perceive. So if you have like images, then you need to have alternative text. You need to have captions for videos. The next one is to be operable. So this means that users must be able to navigate the site, including those that are using only keyboards or maybe even assisted technology. It says also that another principle is that it should be understandable. So content must be readable and predictable. So you should have clear instructions, and the text should be very easy to use. And then the last one is that it should be robust. The site should be compatible with various different assisted or assistive technologies and different browsers. We also refer to this as POUR, P-O-U-R, and I've also provided some links for information related to this. So I want you to think about like, have you ever tried using a website, say that maybe relied on color alone to indicate errors? Okay, so imagine if you were colorblind. You wouldn't know where, say, the mistake is, because you wouldn't be able to see that difference in that color. That's an accessibility failure. Similarly, Healthcare.gov, the earlier launch lacked proper accessibility features. And so it made it difficult for like screen reader users and those with disabilities to be able to navigate the application process. So these are things that we have to think about. I've also provided a link to a checklist that will also kind of walk you through as far as what these different guidelines are so that you can look at your site and ensure that your site meets these different guidelines. As we talked about as far as the WCAG, in order to evaluate your website's accessibility, we use the WCAG, these guidelines, and they include three different levels that you can achieve. One is the single A. Okay, and that's sort of like the basic, and that's where you have like minimal support for assisted technologies. And then there is the double A. Now, this is going to be your standard, and this is really kind of required for most legal compliance. Like if you are running like some kind of government site or something like that, this is the compliance. This is what you need to achieve. You need to achieve, double A standard. And then, of course, there's triple A standard. This is more advanced. Now, this is the highest standard. And of course, it's going to be ideal, but sometimes it's not always feasible. Now, some of the common WCAG accessibility failures include where people will have images, and they won't have alternative text, that's adding that alt text, to your image. And so what happens is it makes it unreadable for screen readers. They can't see the pictures. They're not visually looking at the pictures. So they need to have that alt text to indicate that that's an image. Now, if it's a decorative image, that's a different story. But if it's the image means to convey some kind of message or communicate something, then you need to do that within the alt tag. Then there's also the low contrast text. And this makes reading difficult for like visually impaired users, where you'll have like a light background and then you may have a light gray as far as font color, and it's difficult to read. So you want to make sure that you have contrast, or where you'll have a dark background and then someone will use like maybe a dark red or some kind of dark color. There is not enough contrast. So if you're going to have a dark background, then you want to have, sort of a lighter text color, font color. And if you have a light background, you want to have a darker font color. Now, you don't want to make it too contrast. You don't want to have it where it's so bright, that it kind of, hurts the eyes, but make sure that you have enough contrast. Then there's also keyboard traps, and this prevents users from navigating via keyboard alone. Some people aren't using their mouse, they're using keyboards. So you have to adhere to like certain standards as far as what's represented for keyboards. For instance, in most keyboards hitting like maybe the Alt or the Control or something like that, where the letter like P would represent printing something. So you don't want to assign that, to something else. And also, like when you're doing forms, you want to have it so that people are able to use their tab key to go from form field to form field. And in the order that they need to go in. So these are things that we have to think about, when we're creating these websites. And then again, talking about the forms, inaccessible forms where maybe the labels and the instructions are unclear, for say assistive tech users. Um, so another example would be, again, going back to the healthcare.gov. Initially, it had several of these issues, including the inaccessibility forms and the missing alt tags for key elements. Now, one of the assignments, if you're doing this for my class, one of the assignments that you're going to do is you're going to analyze how these problems that the healthcare.gov encountered actually impacted users. But think about it, take the time and think about like different issues, accessibility issues, and think about like how that would actually impact a user. Like we said, if you use color alone to identify different things, then if someone that has color blindness, they won't be able to, um, perceive the message, that you're trying to convey with that color. So you don't want to rely on color alone. So yes, we've been talking about the healthcare.gov because it's sort of like been sort of a case study in usability and accessibility failures in the beginning launch. And there's different reasons why, maybe the site was rushed and things like that, and they didn't have the opportunity to review and make sure that it was usable and that it was accessible, but these are things that we have to think about as web designers, as UI and UX designers. Now, what happened was in 2013, the launch of the healthcare.gov, it was again one of the probably the most infamous usability failures, in web history. And this is why, the users encountered broken pages, crashed servers, and long wait times. The site, it wasn't stress tested, for the expectation of the amount of user traffic that it was going to get. Over 8 million people attempted to say enroll at the same time, or around the same time, but the site just really couldn't handle that kind of demand. So that was one thing that wasn't tested well, wasn't stress tested, which allowed for this encounter of a bad user experience. The next was that the application process was confusing. Users had to create accounts before even browsing the plan, which really kind of caused a lot of bottlenecks. And then the interface was not user friendly, and the error messages that it produced was very unclear. People didn't know what they had to do. Have you ever encountered a site like that where you've put your information in and either the submit button is not, enabled, or when you go to submit, it tells you that you've got a problem and you don't know what the problem is because it's not communicating to you properly as far as what the error message is. And then the third one is that the site had serious accessibility issues. Like I mentioned before, there was no keyboard navigation for essential tasks. It was incompatible to screen readers, which made enrollment impossible for a lot of the users. So basically, the public perception of this site, even though it may have been a robust site, it may have, you know, been a site that would have been helpful, but these failures damaged the trust in the system. And it led to frustration. It led to negative media coverage. We saw that. And then it also led to lower enrollment rates. So you want to make sure that you're prioritizing as far as usability, you're prioritizing as far as accessibility, so that you don't run into any problems, any of these negative problems with your website. Now, after the disastrous launch, developers redesigned Healthcare.gov using key usability and accessibility principles. One is they looked at performance fixes. They optimized the website to handle the high traffic loads that it was expected to handle. The second one is that it simplified user flow. Users could now browse plans before creating an account. So that's another thing you want to look at. What's your user flow? Does your user flow make sense? Is it something that would lead to a good experience? Sometimes people want to look at things before they actually have to sign up for something. Okay? The third one was clearer error messages. So making it easier, say, for users to be able to fix mistakes. If you identify what the mistake is, if you tell me which field, my form has a problem with, then I can go in and fix that. But if I don't know, that I'm going to get frustrated. I'm going to think that the system is broke, the application or the website is broke, and then I'm going to leave. Unfortunately, people couldn't do that with healthcare.gov, but for most sites, against you're working to get someone or an audience or users or your visitors, and you may be fighting against competition. And so if someone gets frustrated with your site, they can go to your competitor. So you want to make sure that you make your site, being on your site, include, like I said, different things that are going to enhance that user experience. And then the last one that they did was they improved accessibility. The site was updated to meet the WCAG AA standards. So they included like alt tags. They included like the keyboard navigation. They included high contrast design, all of these different things. So as a result, by the next open enrollment period, healthcare.gov functioned smoothly, and then it finally did regain as far as the public trust. So, what can we learn from this? Well, one is, prioritizing users' needs will lead to a better usability and accessibility. You got to empathize with your user. You got to think about what it is that your user wants. What are they coming to your site to do? And you prioritize those things, okay? And that's going to be better. You also want to think about, okay, what issues may they have, again, as far as accessibility. These type of things are going to help you to make your site more successful and more usable and accessible. The next one is to follow the WCAG, and that's going to ensure inclusivity and legal compliance. Okay, especially if you're working with a government website or something like that, you want to make sure that you follow the WCAG. And then last is testing early is going to prevent major failures like the healthcare.gov launch. If they had done the stress testing, if they had tested it with different users, a lot of things would have been uncovered. Now, if you are viewing this as far as for my class, um, when you go to analyze, as far as one of the assignments is to analyze the healthcare.gov usability failures and improvements, one of the things that I want you to do is to think about what went wrong, and how did it affect the users, and then what design changes were made, and how can we apply these lessons to public service websites or basically any website. It may you may have to do a little research, and I have provided a lot of reference information along with videos to help you do that. Now, to wrap it up, usability and accessibility are going to be essential for creating effective, inclusive web experiences. So, some of the key takeaways are going to be that usability is going to ensure a site is efficient, intuitive, and satisfying to use. Accessibility ensures that a site is usable by everyone, and that's going to include people with disabilities. The WCAG standards are going to help evaluate and improve accessibilities, and we looked at the healthcare.gov's failures that show why these usabilities and accessibilities matter to a website. And then we always want to think about designing for user first is going to prevent costly mistakes. So remember, designing an accessible website. It's not just about best practice, it's actually a necessity. Thank you and happy designing.